it's not possible to build a unit and sell it at an affordable price anymore. We are seeing growth beyond the scale of our management capacity. We've been doing that in Brisbane for 20 years. They've been doing it in Sydney and Melbourne for longer. Housing affordability hasn't improved in any of those cases.
Brisbane and pretty much all of southeast Queensland has changed dramatically over the last few years. I moved here in 2014 and it already seems like a completely different city to the one that I moved to. And people who have lived here all their lives have probably seen even bigger change. So welcome to the Brisbane Channel's very first podcast, the Brisbane Channel Podcast In Depth, where we get to dig a lot more deeper into some of the issues that we cover in our videos on the Brisbane Channel on YouTube. And so for these podcasts, the plan is to invite people on who are uniquely positioned to have an opinion on some of these issues that we're facing in Greater Brisbane. And today, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Tony Matthews. Thanks for joining me.
An absolute pleasure. I love the channel. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks, Adam.
I will let you introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Dr. Tony Matthews. I'm a senior lecturer in urban and environmental planning at Griffith University. I've had a long career in urban planning and the environmental side of urban planning, working in research at all levels of government, nationally, internationally, in-state, out-of-state, you name it. I did my original training in Ireland, moved here in 2010, did a PhD at Griffith in from 2010 to 2013, which was part of a project on climate change adaptation in southeast Queensland, but it was funded by the CSIRO. Went from there to QUT. I developed a taste for Brisbane at that stage, and luckily I got a job that allowed me to stay. So did a few years over in their planning program, and then came back to Griffith in 2016. I've been with them since. And so I do a combination of teaching urban and environmental planning, research in that area, certain amount of kind of policy advice and things like that. I do fun stuff like this, and then I do a lot of academic and scholarly research as well, much of which then later goes on to inform policy and such. So it's quite applied what I do, even though I'm based in the university.
So you got a taste for Brisbane. What was it?
Well, I mean, first of all, it was just a better climate. I come from Ireland, which is mostly a cold and wet place, and that's fine for a time. But once you've had enough years of that, you start wishing for a bit more UV and, predictability.
Well, there's plenty of UV today.
Yeah, a little more than we would have expected in April, but
it is hot out here.
Yes, it's warm out here.
So you've been here for a while, and obviously this is your field. So from your perspective, what are we currently seeing playing out in southeast Queensland?
We are seeing growth beyond the scale of our management capacity. And we have an extremely good management capacity for growth in southeast Queensland, which goes back many decades. Sort of population challenges are nothing new here. And I can certainly go into a deep history on that, but let's just put it aside for now and say that for 40 years there have been substantial population challenges in southeast Queensland through population growth. That population growth coming primarily from migration, either international or interstate. It's changed over time, but hundreds or thousands of people arriving into southeast Queensland a week is nothing new. So what we have now is a situation where we have a sort of a structural shortfall of almost everything. So when people say supply and housing, what they really mean is the undersupply is so structural at this point that no amount of supply can catch up unless we dampen down demand. And so we have runaway demand, and it is moving beyond supply. So of almost everything. So housing being the obvious one that people feel. And that's been brewing for decades, but it's really got bad in the last few years. But then it's not just that, it's the other things that people are experiencing as well. It's the traffic, it's the commuting times, it's the delays, it's the queues for a medical appointment or to get into your GP, or maybe even having to find a GP that's open to new clients, for example. It's the queues everywhere. It's all of that. It's the daily frustration. So what we have is a sort of a system that is very well designed and primed to manage a lot of demand over time and at scale, but even that system is coming under pressure from an excess of demand. And that's not just southeast Queensland, but we are feeling it particularly here as well.
So you say this has been going on for quite some time. So what's driving it? How did it all come about?
There's sort of two distinct phases of it. There's the phase up to, let's say, the GFC, the global financial crisis. So you could almost go back to the 1970s and say, 1975 to 2008, it was lifestyle was the big driver. Mostly interstate demand. people from down south selling up and moving to southeast Queensland for a nicer lifestyle, nicer climate, and cheaper property, frankly, such as it was at the time. Slower pace of life, less tolls, less queuing, all that. From the GFC onwards, it has tended towards more of a combination of international and interstate migration. And also a lot of people came up from down south during COVID. And so by the time everything reopened after COVID, they'd already made the move, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of locals really started noticing it, around the time of COVID when people were moving up from Sydney and Melbourne.
Noticed people moving, and then once everything opened up again, suddenly we went from having traffic to having congestion.
And this isn't just Brisbane City. I mean, Logan, Moreton Bay, Ipswich, other Greater Brisbane LGAs. We don't really cover the Gold Coast on the Brisbane Channel, but I'm sure it's happening there as well. So is there anything particularly unique about this part of the world that's encouraging this kind of population growth?
I mean, the primary thing in most of those LGAs is that there's still some greenfield land available. I mean, Brisbane as a local government area is really full, basically. I mean, they're trying to densify, but functionally in terms of there being extra land, there isn't really, if you look at Brisbane City Council's area, their local government boundary. So it's some of these other LGAs still have some greenfield land where you can do things like small lot housing and things like that. Because again, the thing that's driving the housing market is the cost of land, primarily. I mean, we talk about construction materials and things, and they are a part of it, but it's actually the fundamental and underlying thing is the cost of land. So you have to go further out to get cheaper land. And those LGAs want to build up their populations. More populations equals more rates, equals more infrastructure, and a more improved experience for all is the theory. So that's really what's driving it, is its demand for cheaper land for housing, but then the offside or the flip side of it is commuting or long drives, or to get further into it, things like oil vulnerability, which is something that has been discussed theoretically for many years, but we're now about to experience potentially in reality. Yeah. So I think that's what it is, and it's just it's sort of the endless demand, and it has to go somewhere, and those LGAs have had low demand historically, and so now they can absorb more.
Yeah. Quick pause, because I want to shape these podcasts around you, the viewer or listener. If there's someone you'd like me to speak to, let me know by heading to the Brisbane Channel on YouTube and commenting on the podcast video. If you'd like to come on and share your own perspective, there'll also be a short form linked in the description on YouTube where you can put your hand up. And before we get back to it, a quick thanks to the sponsor, YB Painting, who have supported this podcast and are offering viewers and listeners an exclusive 10% discount on their services. Scan the QR code on screen, or if you're listening, visit ybpainting.com.au/TBC-podcast to find out more. I can personally guarantee you won't regret checking them out. All right, let's get back to it. And now you've got like Brisbane. Brisbane lately has been looking a lot into densification, building, these suburban renewal precincts where they're saying, okay, we're going to put a whole lot of, denser housing. We're going to allow the buildings to be taller. Is that a good plan? Is that something that could work?
I mean, it depends on what your goal is, or your goals. If it's housing affordability, it won't work. I mean, what you were talking about broadly has actually been pursued for decades in Australian cities, especially the big ones, including Brisbane. It's called urban consolidation. Get more floor area out of the existing land area, so more density, either go up or build more townhouses or build more units or whatever. Just try and get more from the same. We've been doing that in Brisbane for 20 years. They've been doing it in Sydney and Melbourne for longer. Housing affordability hasn't improved in any of those cases, so it's not going to improve housing affordability. We've many years of empirical evidence, longitudinal demonstrations that doesn't work. It does provide more housing, but again, if there's structural undersupply and excess and constant demand, it's a way of unlocking more units, but it's not necessarily going to fix the problem, because it can't fix the problem. The strategy has limitations, and it can only ever provide so many units, and it won't fix affordability in relative terms. And so if you want to lean more heavily into densification, then you start looking at like much more significant levels of density. I mean, even Sydney's density is twice Brisbane's, but I'm talking much more than that. I wouldn't advocate for it personally. I mean, I think a lot of what brings people here is lifestyle, and you can densify that away. But really, if Brisbane is going to keep on a track like this, we're going to have to start talking about currently densities in Brisbane are about 1,000 people per square kilometre on average. Sydney is twice that. If Brisbane is going to keep going down this path, we're going to be looking at Sydney or higher.
Yeah.
And that means more height in the middle ring suburbs, more high rises even in the outer ring suburbs, more of these suburban clusters, unlocking the hidden middle, as they call it, backyards for subdivisions, granny flats, elderly relatives living at home, or increasingly grown-up children living at home who can't afford to get out of home. All of that needs to come. But in terms of land area, it just really depends on how dense we're willing to go. But there needs to be a conversation about that, a really serious conversation about that, in terms of it's not just about floor area, it's also about impact and livability and lifestyle and all of the other things that we want in our lives, and which are to some degree intentionally created and can be designed out. But whether we want that or not is a conversation that we really need to have. It's not just about density. It's about combining density with the other fundamentals of decent living.
Do you think there's any aspects of the general culture that we have here in southeast Queensland that are actually hindering progress?
The classic one will be people will say it's NIMBYs, not in my backyard people, that, we have, say, housing challenges and population challenges and every other kind of pressure that comes with that. And then to deal with that, we need to obviously build more. That's the simple equation, let's say. But the NIMBYs come along then and say, well, we really like our livability and we really like our middle ring suburbs and we like having largish blocks and nature strips and setbacks and street trees, and we don't really feel like giving that up, and we're going to oppose that, and we feel morally right to do that, and we're resourced to do that, frankly, and so you'll find that NIMBYs are a powerful force in Brisbane, and particularly you'll find that they both congregate within certain areas but also within certain social groups. But that's probably the number one thing. Every stripe of government in southeast Queensland that wants to build, it's a growth region. It always has been. So they want cranes in the sky. They want treaty activity. They want, trucks on the road delivering concrete. That's the vision. But it's the people themselves sometimes stand in the way of that happening, and they'll cite reasonable things like livability, like they want backyards, or even if they're not that big, and they want trees and they want that stuff, and they don't want houses where there could be a sports field or whatever the case is. And so you'll always find sympathy on both sides of the argument. But in Brisbane, the development pressure is always there, but there is a strong NIMBY block that pushes back around the city in different places, and southeast Queensland generally.
One thing I've been seeing a lot on the channel is people talking about, they'll say that, the city council, for example, Brisbane City Council, they want development because they're all about just supporting the developers, and there's a lot of complaints about housing affordability with there being a lot of development, but the places that are being developed are they're high-end luxury.
Yeah.
There's a lot of luxury apartments, things like that. And one of the things often cited is that just the costs of getting things done mean that it's just not feasible to develop lower cost housing. So how do we deal with that kind of situation?
That's a complex one. The first thing to say about developers is nothing gets built without them. Governments don't build anything. They don't anymore. They haven't in years. Developers build everything. And so if you want houses, we need the development industry. And it's easy to kind of beat up the development industry because there are some slippery operators out there, same as there are in every industry. And there are shoddy products out there, same as there are in every industry. But there's also well-intentioned developers that do their best to deliver quality at a price, as best they can. The reality is developers take on huge risk. And so they have an entitlement to make a profit. And people have it in their mind that these developers are making massive profits, but few of them are. A lot of them are just barely making it. And then you introduce the construction price issue and the materiality issue and the price of labor and things like that. And the difficulty now is bringing any unit to market is probably more expensive than any unit that's on market currently. A lot of developers have land at the moment, but they won't build on it because it's too expensive to build on it. Or they'll have to sell it at a price point that's way beyond most people. And that's not really their fault. Those are kind of market forces as much as anything else. and supply and demand, and developers don't set supply and demand. They respond to it just like everybody else does, in different ways, admittedly, but they don't set it. So, they find themselves often in tricky situations too, where they're under pressure to build, but they can't get the price point that they need to build, or they're going to have to sell for a much higher end price, and so it's going to go to a higher, a buyer with a larger disposable income or larger borrowings or whatever, which again, that just continues to perpetuate the affordability problem. Part of the affordability problem at this stage is that, like, unless governments wear the loss, it's not possible to build a unit and sell it at an affordable price anymore. It really isn't. And governments don't build social housing anymore. They let the development industry do that mostly. And they try and do it. And there's some great operators around there, and, both in Brisbane and around the region, who will try and bring, affordable units to the market. But even when they do that, you'll often find that what they do is they bring them to the market for specific groups, like seniors, for example, or people with disabilities, where they have a kind of a secure market, but not young families. So it's a very tricky one. And developers get beaten up a lot, and sometimes it's deserving, but not all the time. And without them, we'd have no buildings and no units being built. It's hard to call that one sometimes. There's a lot of moving parts.
Are there things that have been tried internationally that might work here in terms of improving affordability?
I mean, what you'll hear a lot of is conversation about things like, why don't we do modular building, for example? Why aren't we 3D printing houses? Or why aren't we buying houses that are, factory manufactured and assembled on site? And one of the things that catches the Australian market with a lot of these innovations is we don't have the population, right? We've 26 million people, 27 million people. So it's like, that's the size of one US state. We're not a large market, and we're geographically very dislocated from everybody else, right? Yeah. So we don't get scale on a lot of things. And that's why we don't do them. Mm-hmm. And over time, that has meant that the Australian construction industry has also become very locked into a certain type of building standard. For housing, it's mostly, brick veneer or full timber frame. They do a certain type of commercial build. They do a certain type of residential high-rise build. They're used to doing things a particular way, and they've done all of their building costings and all of their economics around this, and they can sort of work out their margins. They don't want to do anything that's not that, because it's a non-traditional build. It has non-traditional cost structures. It could have cost overruns. They certainly don't want to do fixed price on anything unusual. And so what ends up happening is that most of the market just says, fine, all right, look, we'll take what we can get. And so a lot of those innovations that could come in aren't coming in. They might drive down prices.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that people don't tend to factor in when they're saying, oh, well, they did something in this country or that country. But, the situation here in Australia is there's many aspects of, our geography and, just the population density, things like that make it a completely different thing. So you can't just transfer from something that worked somewhere else and just drop it in Australia.
No, and I mean, oftentimes it's very tempting for people to think that you can, but you can't, unfortunately. You just can't. Our spatial organization doesn't allow a lot of this anyway. We developed in an entirely car-centric way in the post-war era especially. So even our spatial form makes it difficult to do a lot of this kind of stuff. And if you think about that, even in terms of transport and logistic costs, even, it's like it starts to run up. So yeah, we're not, like I often say to people, Australian cities are very unique because they developed to some degree in isolation. It's not that they didn't take ideas from other parts of the world or rerun experiments from other parts of the world, but they've also developed a lot in response to their own particular environments and their climates and topography and all of that stuff. So they're quite unique.
I want to go back to something. You talked about the way our cities were designed a particular way in the past. And so are we kind of trapped by what was done at that time? To what extent, I mean, Brisbane is infamous for being very intentionally designed to be car-centric back in the day. So with our population growing at the rate it is, how much can we actually change the way our city is laid out? Like how much are we trapped? Or do we just need to get more creative with how we approach things?
Well, we can't undo the base footprint of our cities. So if you think about the suburban nodes and using the kind of arterial road model and things like that, that can't really be undone. And it's hard to densify along those arterial roads any more than we've already done, because it's hard to have more and more traffic coming in and out of them. They need to go at speed. So again, we are at this kind of suburban node thing. It's like a hub and spoke model, and we're stuck with that. Now, that's not to say we can't do a lot with the hubs, and it's not to say that we can't make the spokes more efficient with more public transport and things like the introduction of Cross River Rail and all that. But we are suburbanized now, and there's no retreating from that. Like, we're not going to be retreating back into the CBD or anything like that. It's more at this point about trying to avoid further overspill. Like, because we've been car dependent for so long, it's very tempting to just keep opening up more land further out. People will keep driving there. You know, there's always going to be somebody who'll take on the extra Ks for they'll pick up the driving Ks to save on the house cost Ks or whatever. We do have a firm urban growth boundary here which prevents a bit of that, but that's the model that ultimately is prevalent and needs to be resisted. It's very hard to resist. And all you can really do in working with that embedded history is the kind of, to my mind anyway, is focusing on these urban precincts, whether they're in the CBD and around the CBD within a 5K ring, or whether they're further out in a 10K or a 15 plus K ring. But it's the kind of suburban precinct and node model. I mean, even if you think of somewhere like if you want to see kind of, in one way, how to do it, but also how not to do it. Like, the centre of Sunnybank's a great example, because that wasn't really Brisbane City Council so much as it was actually just business owners who did all of that. But most of Sunnybank is built along a series of arterial roads, so it's a horrendous pedestrian experience. And it's totally car dependent because of it. And then the car parks are mayhem on account of that. Oh, yes. And it's like, how would you now that you have all of this life and you have these urban precincts and it's busy at nighttime, everybody wants to be there, how do we now make that more pedestrian friendly? Well, the problem is we kind of can't, because the location has been sort of spatially bounded now by the road network. And if we're going to reduce that traffic somehow, it's got to go someplace else, and we don't have anywhere else to send it. And so these are some of the practical problems. But the solution, if you like, the management of this, is to try and get more life going at the suburban node level, you know. And I think that's starting to be more of a focus. And you'll see much more of that in the outer LGAs now, where they're really trying to make a positive association between a whole life lived there and not just sleeping there, you know. Yeah. Like Moreton Bay Regional, or City Council as they now are, they don't want residents of Moreton Bay thinking towards Brisbane for all their entertainment. You know, they want people thinking, this is where I am on the weekend, this is where I should do my socializing, or whatever. So I think we're seeing more of that, both within the cities and within the region. But that's the only way we could do it, and the car's not going anywhere, unfortunately. I mean, well, fortunately or unfortunately, we're still going to need long commutes.
Yeah, so I guess my big question is, with things the way that they are now and the way that you would expect that they're travelling, how do you see Southeast Queensland, you know, where do you see us in, say, 10, 20 years' time?
That's a really good question. You know, when I first came here, they had the Southeast Queensland Regional Plan 2009 to 2036, I think, which seemed like a long way away. Now isn't that far away. And I would say much of what they were predicting in 2009 for 2036 is probably already with us 10 years early. Look, it's going to be more growth, more of everything. The question is, like, to what degree we manage it or are able to moderate it or dampen the impacts of it. I mean, we already have more than enough projects going on. You know, there's tons of infrastructural development going on here. There always has been tons of infrastructural development. We're flat out trying to do the basics and then do things like Cross River Rail and the Olympics and all of these other big projects. Those things are still going to be either ongoing or just recently completed in 10 years. So we're going to have those things. We're going to have a lot more people. The question is how many more people. And this is one of the problems that a lot of Australian cities and regions have, and Southeast Queensland's no different. Federal government sets migration targets, and once somebody moves to the country as a migrant, like, often they can go where they like. Maybe they have a university place or something which keeps them, but very often they can move around freely. And so it makes it difficult for state governments and city councils to predict population long term because of that. They don't know who's coming and who isn't. It's not about birth rates or anything like that. That's more predictable, but it's not about that. So it's difficult. So it's like there'll be more people, there'll be more congestion, there'll be all of the big infrastructure projects that are ongoing now will be completed, but a whole bunch more will probably have started. I doubt we will have resolved the housing problem. We'll still be hearing a lot about housing affordability and moaning about that, and probably rightly so. It's likely that 10 years from now, Brisbane will have a lot more name recognition internationally. I mean, it doesn't have great international name recognition yet, certainly not compared to the big two. It clearly wants that. I think we're going to see an increasingly tight connection building on what's been developing for many years with the Asia Pacific. I mean, we're right in the middle of that, always have been and still want to be. So that's not just Southeast Asia, that's also the whole west coast of the US and Canada. There's going to be a lot of partnerships there. We're going to probably start to see a lot more tourism focused on Southeast Queensland rather than just things like flying into Brisbane to get to the Great Barrier Reef. I mean, we're really coming on as a destination in ourselves. I mean, aside from the Gold Coast and a few Sunshine Coast attractions, we've got a lot more going on. The city's offering a lot more now. Big plans to activate the river. I mean, it's still pretty active. I know, again, people complain Brisbane is not activating its river as well as it should. Go to some cities where it's not activated at all, and you'll see that we're doing good work. So there'll, I suspect, be more of that. More high-rise buildings, but fundamentally not all that different from today, just a bit busier and maybe a bit more brightly lit in parts.
Now, I can't let you go without asking you about one thing in particular, because it comes up so much in the comments on the Brisbane Channel, and that is migration. It's been in a lot of the things that you've talked about so far today. And so, I mean, would we be better off if we had less migration from other states and overseas? I mean, what's the ideal situation there? Because it seems to be at the root of a lot of the challenges that we're facing with infrastructure, with having enough housing for everybody to have somewhere to live. What's your position on that?
I mean, first of all, there's like just to look at migration objectively, like we're just talking about volume of people, right? We're not talking about who they are, where they come from, or what they represent. It's not that, right? Yeah. It's just like pouring rice into a jar. Eventually, there's too many rice grains for the jar, right? That's all we're talking about. Yeah. It's easy enough, and viewers can do this, right? They can just ask ChatGPT to do this for them. Match migration rates into Southeast Queensland with housing production rates by decade from the 1970s to today. And what you'll see is it was much more evenly and closely matched right up until about 2012, 2013. And so there was significant migration inflows into Southeast Queensland, which were creating population pressures, which were creating housing pressures, but there was enough stock being delivered and there were not enough people for it to be the kind of crazy bonanza that we have now. What happened from about 2015 onwards was it began to decouple. The volume of people got much larger. The volume of housing coming through wasn't growing in comparison. It wasn't growing accordingly. That's when the structural undersupply locked in. Then we had this weird lag during COVID where we had almost no migrants because everybody went home. And rent prices, if viewers recall, collapsed in Brisbane. They went way down and then suddenly they went way back up again. So it's not about not having a migration system, and it's not about intentionally keeping people out. It's about matching the carrying capacity of a city like Brisbane to the amount of people that can or should be living there. And that's the difficulty. And that's the challenge. And like migration is not going to stop into Australia. The reason for that is because it's not like you'll be told, it's about sort of migrants make the economy and everything better. And it's like, that's true to a point, but really what's happened is we haven't had any children. And so we don't have enough workers. And that's why we need such a large number of migrants coming in, because we're just slotting them straight into the workforce because we have this kind of aging growing population. So you got a larger and larger cohort of the population that's becoming less economically active, well, less economically productive, but remaining quite economically active. I'm talking about a lot of the retirees who are living on and living well, and who are still buying investment properties and things like that. And then you have fewer workers because of less children being born, so you have a lower tax base. The way to push that up is to bring in more workers. They push up the tax base. That also causes problems in the housing market and things like that. So it's really, the challenge is about bringing the migration level back to something more like it was up to around the GFC, where it was about 120,000 a year, and that was well matched with supply and delivery of housing, and price rises weren't crazy. Or even bringing it back to where we were sort of 10 years proportionately. But particularly, Australia's got the highest per capita highest rate of migration in the developed world in the last 3 years, nearly 1 million new residents. I mean, again, by the number, we're talking somewhere between 12 and 1,500 people a week into southeast Queensland. Like, where are they going? It's not sustainable. Again, it's not about who they are, it's not about any of that. It's just about volume and carrying capacity. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is it's like, sure, we could build a lot more housing, we could house a lot more people, but we'd give up a lot of what we enjoy about southeast Queensland and Brisbane, which is livability and outdoor space and backyards. And, you could go really dense if you wanted to, but you change the character of everything that way. So it's about moderating that intake overall. And I think, again, the reason that there's such controversy about migration at the moment is people have simply put the supply and demand equations together. And it's not even about historical migration. I'm a migrant myself. It'd be disingenuous for me to be criticizing migration, right? Yeah. But it's more about sort of, when did it start to go wrong? Mm-hmm. I think that's what people are really starting to ask. Yeah. And also they're looking forward and they're saying, well, if this is the case now in 2026, what's it going to be like in 2036 when my 8-year-old is 18? Or whatever the case may be. And so it's becoming more real in that sense. So I think the public pressure around migration is not about, social disharmony so much as it is about just agitation because of excess competition for limited resources, and people feeling like it doesn't need to be that way, and the decisions taken at federal government level about setting that target are not necessarily what people on the ground would have wanted had they ever been asked. So it's just about moderating it a little bit. But because of that structural issue, and that goes back 10 years, that structural undersupply issue, it probably would require a radical curtailing of volume for a while, like probably more than you intended to, like a severe cutback for a few years and then a relaxation again, just to allow that. It's like the oil crisis we're having right now. It's eventually the bubble in the pipeline is going to flow through, and that's what we have with the housing market as well. We need to let that out of the system. So probably more like, I would say, 150,000 per annum would be better than the pre-COVID historic. The pre-COVID was, I think, 250, up to 250 sometimes, like 180 to 250. Pre-GFC was more like 100,000. So probably the 100 to 150,000 would be good given the relative population now versus then. That'd probably sort it out for a few years. Is it going to tank the economy? No, I doubt it. I mean, I really doubt that. There's lots of models you can look at that would tell you that that's not going to be the case, because we're not talking about, massive shortfalls of people. But yeah, that's what the issue is largely. Is there's too much pressure in the system and everybody's starting to feel it and they don't like it and they weren't asked about it and they're worried about the future, and understandably so. And so you don't have sort of, I mean, I haven't really seen any, like you could look at somewhere like Europe where some of the conversations about migration are much more focused on certain groups and getting rid of them. It's not about housing, it's about social cohesion. I think here it's mostly about housing. Yes. It's not like, the media will prod at social cohesion a bit, but I think it's mostly about housing and just, the level of pressure for everything. It's not about hating on one group or another. It doesn't strike me as being that.
Yeah, no, the same. I feel it.
Yeah.
But then I'm not an academic.
well, I mean, I am, and I might, there might be thousands of academics out there right now squealing that, of course, it's about one group disliking another. It's no, I'm looking at the objective issue here. It's like, I don't think it's that. Yeah, I really don't.
Well, let's move to something very local to finish with, and that is, a lot of people are seeing that the rapid change happening, and some people are saying that it's like the place is losing its character, it's losing the things that make it unique. So I guess, is that happening would be one question. The other would be, how do we balance bringing what a city needs to function well and what might, to deal with the changing population and even the changing demographics of that population, with, retaining some of those things that really make this part of the world special?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance. Actually, I think probably the best way to answer that, Adam, is let's look at a case study of somewhere like West End, which had great character and was kind of a bohemian and relatively cheap and fun place, an inner city suburb that had a particular kind of a vibe at one time. And now it's lost all of its character and all of its vibe, and it's been in the quest for modernity and development, and so there's some great developments in West End. I think West Village is very nice, for example, but it's not West End of 10 or 15 years ago. It's the City Council's view of what West End should be. And earlier in this conversation, I mentioned NIMBY groups, and particularly the West End one, and they were very unsuccessful in protecting a lot of West End. I'm sympathetic to them. They're still trying to defend the Kirulpa area, and fair play to them. But yeah, I think what happened there is a cautionary tale. That's not what we want for Brisbane. Like, that was that level of development into West End overwhelmed the place, and it caused a huge social change. Rents skyrocketed, and all the people that used to be there left, and the flop houses got knocked down and turned into shiny apartments, kind of like what you were talking about earlier. That's not a great outcome. A flip side of that is somewhere like Tenerife, where you take a post-industrial area and you turn it into something very beautiful, and you protect and retain the heritage, albeit at a sort of an exclusivity. So I think that's the line that we need to try and travel over to Brisbane. And also Brisbane has to be quite careful, because like previous state governments, I mean, going back a long way, were very, very careless with Brisbane's built heritage. And so we don't have a lot of it left. Like, we have very few colonial buildings left, even in the CBD. Even our timber and tin heritage is coming under a lot of pressure. So those vernaculars, those bits of architecture, those places that are very unique to Brisbane, they need to be protected carefully as well. What we have left matters more than ever. So I think that's really important. I think, one thing that probably we could be a lot more sophisticated about in Brisbane that would help retain a sense of character is things like sight lines, which never seem to come into consideration, like viewing sheds and prospects. Like, one great example that I'll give you that nobody seems to ever know about is that the roof line of the QPAC, the original roof line of QPAC, was designed to mirror the ridge line of Mount Cootha behind it.
Right.
So if you looked at it from across the river, or from, say, where the Parliament House is, or from the Treasury building, you can't see that anymore, because there's a bunch of ugly apartment buildings in the background. That's a heritage that we'll never get back now. The narrative will be, well, people need places to live in apartments, and it's nice that an architect had a vision once upon a time, but the city needs, and that's, again, that's so, but it's once you start seeing these little things, they become more essential to protect, because once they're lost, they're gone forever. And there are large parts of Brisbane that are kind of like, they're not unappealing, but they don't have any place identity. They don't look that unique, or you don't know where you are, or, there's a lot of Brisbane a bit like that. So the places that do have place identity really need to dig in and hold on to that. And even like around Upper Mount Gravatt, where I once lived, I remember thinking that it was very like a European city, in so much as it was very walkable. All little workers' cottages on walkable little streets and narrow side streets and things like that. All of which now have just been replaced with these massive 5- and 6-story suburban apartment horror shows. And it's like, are we getting a better city from this, or are we just getting more bedrooms? And so that's the issue. But also, in a development town, which this is, the future always gets far more affection than the past, and sentimentality is often way back the line of reasoning. And I've even noticed that with housing recently. Like, it's one thing to sort of say we need to keep our character, and it's government's responsibility, Brisbane City Council or whichever council is responsible. It's also our responsibility as as individuals and citizens and property owners and things like that. I mean, the amount of decent housing that gets knocked down nowadays so somebody can build their dream mansion. It's like, well, that house is only 15 years old, you know? Like, this really doesn't seem like I can't understand that, but that mentality is very prevalent in our suburbs even, you know? And we don't tend to protect a lot of that stuff, and maybe we shouldn't, but you know, individuals are responsible for protecting things as well, you know, or advocating for them. It's not always the role of officialdom. And sometimes we're very quick to get rid of good things ourselves, you know. And so in some cases, maybe people just need to think a little bit more about that. It's the same thing with even things like a big part of Brisbane's heritage is like backyard trees, biodiversity. You know, every time somebody takes a tree out of their yard, that's a loss for the whole neighbourhood. That is a heritage loss for the whole neighbourhood in a way. We don't think about it like that. And, you know, those kinds of things matter, but it's a perception shift as much as anything, and it's not just government, it's all of us. And particularly in the places where we still have remnant heritage value, we should be really focused on protecting it, and not just protecting it up close, but protecting it from far away if possible, so that people can see it from a distance or whatever the case may be.
All right, well, I think we'll call that a day, because we could talk. I could, you know, ask you questions all day, and
I haven't said anything mean about the Olympics, so maybe let's stop.
So well, thanks for joining me on the very first podcast.
Wow, pleasure. Thanks for having me, and it's been fun.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for joining me for the very, very first podcast on the Brisbane Channel. I didn't actually put any thought into how to end a podcast. I'll have that sorted in the next one. But see ya.